The foreman said it loud enough to carry the length of the street. "No woman gentles that horse." He laughed after, one boot up on the corral rail, and the men along the boards laughed with him. Ruth Calder stood in the dust with a braided rope halter gripped in both hands at her waist. She was a widow of about 30, marriage age still, in a plain work dress the deep blue of cold water. Dark hair drawn back flat under no bonnet, a fine boned face the sun had touched hard. She was the widow of Cole Calder, the bronc buster the county blamed for the morning a rancher's boy was thrown from a half-broke horse and did not get up, and no boarding house in Sweetwater Bend would take her money. She had said only one quiet thing before the foreman turned it into a show. "He doesn't want breaking," she had said, watching the coal-black stallion through the rails. "He wants quiet hands and time. Not spurs, not a snubbing post, quiet hands." Vance grinned at the street. "You hear the widow? Quiet hands." He struck the rail with the flat of his palm, and the horse behind him spun and struck it back. "That stud has put 3 men down and near took Del Rusk's arm. And she's going to pet him gentle." He tipped his hat mockingly. "No woman gentles that horse, ma'am. No man has. Best go on before somebody laughs you clear to the county line." "I've been laughed farther than that," Ruth said. The rancher heard all of it. Eli Dawes came out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, a lean man in a dark hat gone pale at the crease, plain vest over a work shirt. Suspenders worn soft, weathered and quiet and tired, in the way of a man short a hand at the worst season of the year. His gaze went over the crowd, then settled on the widow with the halter in her fists, and he plainly decided he was done with the whole spectacle. "You cook?" he asked her. "I cook. My place needs one till winter. There's board in it, cook's wages, a dry room off the kitchen." He folded the rag into his pocket and said the last of it flat, so no one could hear romance in a thing that had none in it. "One rule, you stay out of that round pen. I've buried enough this year." Ruth looked once more at the black horse turning his tight, furious circle in a pen too small for so much fear. Then she looked back at the man. "I'll cook," she said. She said nothing at all about the pen. Vance laughed again, softer. "She won't last the week, Eli. That's my worry, not yours," Eli said, and handed the widow up onto the wagon seat. They rode the first miles without a word between them. The country opened out gold and enormous, sage running to the foot of hills the color of old bruises, a windmill turning slow against a sky so blue it hurt. Ruth held the halter in her lap. It was the only thing worth holding her husband had left her, that and a tally book bound in cracked oilcloth down in her carpet-bag. "Your man made that," Eli said at last, nodding at the halter. "Not a question. He braided it the last winter he was alive. Off waxed cord he twisted on his own knee by the stove. Folks say Cole Calder ruined the horse that killed the Pruitt boy. Folks say a lot with their coffee." Ruth turned the halter over in her hands. "My husband was the only man in this territory trying to undo the ruining. He learned it off a handbill a fellow who claimed he could gentle any horse alive without a whip. Cole believed it when no buster would. Wrote every bit of it down." She looked out at the hills. The county hung a dead boy on him for it. "Then it hung him on me." Eli drove a while in silence. "I don't need you near my stud," he said. "I need you at my stove. You said your rule once. I heard it." He glanced at her, at the halter she would not set down, and he let it lie. The Dawes place sat in a fold of the hills, low house, long bunkhouse, and a round pen off the barn where the black horse lived alone. The crew was 5 hard men. The first supper Ruth set before them was beef and biscuit and a dried apple thing that made 2 of them go quiet and 1 go back for thirds, and after that nobody said out loud she would only last the week. She rose before the men. That was the first thing they marked. She was at the stove in the black dark, and while the crew still slept, she carried a measure of grain beyond the barn to the round pen, set it inside the rails, and stood there doing nothing at all. The stallion came off the far side snorting, braced for the fight that always came. The rope, the pole, the spur that taught a horse a man was a thing to be survived. He waited for it. She gave him nothing to wait for. She stood with her back half to him, drank a tin cup of coffee, watched the hills go pink, and when he crowded close and threw his head, she did not flinch and did not raise a hand. Having nothing to fight, after a while, he stopped. That was the whole of the first morning. It was everything. Eli watched from the barn door with his coffee going cold. He had made the rule. He watched her break it, and he chose not to see, and he said not one word. The days took a shape. She cooked, she carried grain, and she took her chores into the pen where the horse could watch, mending a strap, coiling a line, drinking her coffee, and each dawn she asked him for one small thing. A step, a turned ear, a head dropped an inch. The instant he gave it, she quit asking and stepped back. So the giving cost him nothing, and the letting be was his reward. She was teaching him the one thing no one had allowed him to learn, that a person could be the place where pressure ended, not the place it began. The men argued about it over the rails. "She don't do nothing," said the youngest hand, a rope-thin boy named Toby. "She just stands there. She stood there yesterday and the day before that," said Otis, the gray-mustached cook's helper who talked slow. "Yesterday that horse would have took your arm to the elbow. This morning he stood 10 foot off her and dozed with a hind foot cocked. You call that nothing, boy, you go on and stand in there and do it. I ain't fool enough." "No," Otis said, "you ain't patient enough." "Ain't the same failing." Toby had no answer for that. The town heard of it, wrong at first and then slowly less wrong. What reached the mercantile counter was that the Dawes widow had gone soft in the head and was talking to a killer like a Christian, and Mrs. Pruitt, who kept the counter, told it twice to 2 customers before noon. But Otis came in of a Saturday for coffee and flour, and Otis was a truthful man. "He walks up to her now," Otis said, counting coins onto the counter. "Judge, that horse." Walks right up and stands quiet. "I seen it with my own 2 eyes. That horse near killed Del Rusk, Mrs.," Pruitt said. "It's the same horse that threw my sister's boy." "I know what it did," Otis said. "I'm telling you what it does. Those ain't the same, and a body ought to allow for the difference. A body ought to mind his flour." But she said it slower than she'd have said it a month before, and that was one spectator turned, though he stood at a counter and not a fence. Out at the ranch, Eli took to staying at the table after the crew had scraped their plates and gone. He would not say much. He would turn his coffee cup in its ring of light and watch the widow work the dishes. "You could break him faster," he said one night. "Rope and post. A week and he'd carry a saddle." "I could break him faster," Ruth agreed, her hands in the wash water. "And you'd have a horse that flinched every dawn of his life and put a man down the first spring he felt strong. Cole broke a horse fast once for a buyer in a hurry. He never did it again. Why not? Because the horse remembered. She dried a plate slow. A horse forgets nothing, Eli, not a kindness, not a spur. Every man who touched Judge taught him the same lesson, and he learned it perfect that a person is a thing that hurts you and won't quit till you quit first. I'm not teaching him a new trick. I'm teaching him he learned the old one from liars." Eli was quiet a while, turning the cup. "The Pruitt boy," he said. Folks say your husband put a green horse under a child. Folks weren't there. Her voice did not rise. That horse had been spurred bloody and snubbed to a post by 3 men before it ever came to Cole. He told them it wasn't sound in its mind yet. Told them to give it a year. The boy's father wanted it broke for the fall sale and wouldn't wait a season. She set the plate down careful. A ruined horse threw a boy, and the county needed a name that wasn't its own. Cole was handy. Then he died, and I was handier. And you came here anyway, to a stud everybody calls a killer. Where else does a widow go, she said, but toward the one thing nobody else will touch. Eli had no answer for that. He drank his cold coffee and went out to the bunkhouse, and the next morning the gate swung silent for the first time. Love did not announce itself on the Dawes place. It came in objects. The round pen gate had dragged on a warped post for 2 years, and a gate you had to lift and drop is how a body gets hurt near a spooky horse. Ruth never mentioned it. But she came out one gray dawn, and it swung silent and level under her hand, sweet as a whisper. And there were fresh pale curls of pine on the ground where a plane had taken the sticking edge down clean. She stood a moment, looking at the wood shavings. Eli was forking hay inside the barn. The gate swings quiet now, she said through the door. Post must have settled, he said, not turning around. In the night. Planed itself smooth, too. Wood does funny things out here. It does, she agreed, and let him have it, and swung the quiet gate every morning after, and knew. She answered in kind. His good coat hung on a peg by the door with the lining torn half out of a sleeve, and one evening after the dishes she took it down, sat by the lamp, and mended it with the same waxed thread she used for a halter small even stitches. She hung it back on the peg without a word. He put it on the next cold morning and felt the sleeve hole and stopped in the doorway. You mend this? Post must have settled, she said, at the stove, her back to him. She heard him breathe out something that was almost a laugh, the first she'd heard from him. He went out into the cold with his whole sleeve and did not say thank you, and did not need to. That was how the two of them said everything. The tally book came out at night. She wrote in it as her husband had, the day's small yielding things, the step gained and the step lost. On the first page, in Cole's plain pencil hand, was the one rule the whole method came down to, and she read it most nights before she slept. What the men who would someday line a fence needed to know was written there, in a dead man's hand, and not one of them had ever had the patience to read it. Then came the morning it nearly ended. A blue norther had put an edge on the wind, and the horse was full of it, and Ruth asked for one small thing too soon and reached for the halter at the wrong half-second. The stallion came around striking, all that old buried fear up in one white-eyed instant, and a forehoof caught her across the hip and put her down hard. She rolled under the bottom rail with her breath gone and blood on her lip where her own teeth had cut it. Eli was over the rail and had her up before the men reached the gate. His hands, that never touched her, were on her shoulders now, and his face was gray. That's done. His voice was low and hard. You hear me. Done. I'll not scrape a second calder off my ground for that animal. I asked wrong. She got her breath and pushed the hair off her face with a shaking hand. It wasn't him, Eli, I asked too fast in a bad wind. That was mine, not his. I don't care whose it was. Look at you. Look at him. She turned her head. The horse stood trembling against the far rail, more frightened than she was. He's not sorry he did it. He's terrified he did it. There's a whole world between those, and every man who ever touched him only knew the one. Eli said nothing. He helped her to the house, and he was quiet all that day in a way the crew had never seen in him. Vance heard of it by supper and rode out the next morning, boot up on the wagon tongue, and said to Eli's face what the street had said for weeks. "You've got a dead man's widow playing with a killer stud on your own ground," Vance said. "When she's stove in for good, it's your name that carries it. Send her off, Eli, before the county watches you bury the second Calder to die of that horse." Ruth heard it from the kitchen window, dishwater going cold around her wrists. "She stays till fall," Eli said. "That was the bargain." "Bargain," Vance snorted. "You soft on her or just stubborn?" "You're on my ground, Vance. Ride off it." "Your funeral," Vance said pleasantly, and rode off. That night, Ruth came the closest she ever came to going. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed with the carpet bag half packed and the stage schedule folded in her apron, the bruise on her hip a deep, sick color. She could take the morning stage. She could be gone before the horse woke, and a town that wanted to watch her fail could go on wanting. She did not finish packing. She took out the tally book instead and uncapped the pencil and wrote down plain the things she'd done wrong so she'd not do it twice, ask too fast, bad wind, my fault, not his, and under it she copied out again the first rule in her husband's hand. Reading it, she stopped shaking. In the morning she was at the stove in the dark and then away to the pen behind the barn. And she asked the horse for nothing at all that day. She only stood. And near noon, on his own, with no one asking, the black stallion crossed the pen and put his head down over her shoulder and breathed against her neck, and Ruth Calder stood very still and let him, and did not cry until he'd wandered off again. Fall came all at once, gold going to brown, and a bite in the dawn. Roundup brought the crews in and the town out, and it brought Vance back, and this time he did not come quiet. He came at the head of a knot of riders, and he had planned it, because half of Sweetwater Bend was already ranged along the Dawes corral fence with the sun still climbing. Men on the rails, women behind them, the mercantile shut for the morning. They had come to watch the outlaw stud throw the fool widow one last time. Dawes. Vance called across the yard, loud so the crowd caught every word. "I'll say it where the county can witness. That woman's got no business near that animal. Won't send her off. We'll settle it before she gets a man killed. Bring the stud out. Let these good people see what she's really got, or admit you've carried a killer horse and a jinxed widow all summer on a fool's hope." The crowd murmured. Somewhere a man laughed, easy and certain, the sound of a thing everybody thought they already knew. Eli stepped out and set his jaw, and Ruth saw him draw breath to answer for her. She put her hand on his arm. "I'll answer," she said. "Quiet. Ruth, you planed the gate quiet so I'd be safe. Let me be the one to walk through it." She met his eyes. "Stand behind me. Just there. That's all I need of you." He looked at her a long moment, and he chose to let her, and he stepped back one pace behind her shoulder and stayed. She walked to the barn in her cold water-blue dress, dark hair drawn back plain, took down the braided halter her husband had made, and carried it in both hands to the round pen where the whole town could see. She let herself through the gate that swung silent, latched it behind her, and stood alone in the pen with the killer horse and a fence full of people who had come to see her hurt. Here is the thing the fence had come without knowing. Every man who had ever handled that horse had broken horses by the one method the country knew, fear and exhaustion, the snubbing post, the spur, the fight that ran a horse to the end of himself until he learned a person was a thing to be endured. That is what had been done to the Pruitt boy's horse before it ever threw him. That is what had been tried on this black stud. and it had made of him exactly what a cornered, frightened creature becomes. The town had named him a killer. He had never once in his life been anything but a horse no person had let alone. Ruth had given the stallion nothing to strike against. Dawn after dawn, she had been the one still place in a world that had only pushed at him, asking one small yield and releasing him the instant he gave it until slow, so slow no watching man could mark the day it turned. The stallion had learned the single thing withheld from him all his life, that a person was not where the pressure started. A person was where it stopped. She did not go to him. She stood in the center of the pen with the halter loose in one hand and her back half turned, as she had stood that first cold morning, and she asked for nothing at all. The crowd went still, watching her ask for nothing. The black horse threw his head once. He rolled the white of his eye at the strange press of people on his rails. He struck the ground and blew. And then, no rope on him, no man near him, the whole of Sweetwater Bend holding its breath, he came off the far rail and walked. A slow circle, and in at her shoulder, close as he had come the day she did not cry, and there he stopped. Ruth lifted the braided halter in both hands, easy, no hurry in it, and the killer horse that had thrown every man in the county dropped his head down into it, of his own will, no rope and no fight, and stood gentled at the widow's shoulder in the golden light. Nobody laughed. The fence had gone dead silent, a whole town that had come to see one thing and was seeing a wholly other thing, and the quiet held long past the moment it should have broken, because not one of them had anything ready to say. Ruth did not smile. She did not turn to face them. There is no moment in this where she stood in the middle of that pen and told the men what they could do with their spurs. She led the horse once around on a slack rope so they could all see it was true and no trick, then walked to the gate, opened it, and came out into the yard where the foreman stood. She held the halter out to him across the space between them. "Take it," she said. Vance's hand did not come up. He looked at the halter and at the horse standing quiet in the open gate and had nothing to put on his face. "My husband died knowing the one thing this town won't hear," Ruth said, plain, not loud, though in that silence it carried the length of the fence the same as the foreman's laugh had carried the first day. The Pruitt boy's horse didn't throw him because it was born wicked. It threw him because it had been ruined by a spur and a post long before any boy climbed it. Cole knew. He wrote it down. And this county hung the ruin of that horse around the neck of the only man trying to mend it. Then it hung him around mine. She pushed the halter a half-inch nearer. "There is no killer horse, Vance. There is only a horse nobody ever once let alone. Take it. Learn to make one. You'll never break another animal as long as you live." Vance still did not take it. But an old rancher at the fence lifted his hat off, slow, and held it to his chest. And then another did, and the bared heads went down the rail the same slow way Otis's word had gone down the counter one, and then another, and then the rest, until there was not a covered head along the whole corral. It was Toby who crossed first. The rope-thin boy came off the rail and across the yard, twisting his hat in both hands, ears gone red. "Ma'am," he would not quite meet her eye. "The foreman didn't send me. Nobody sent me." He swallowed. "Could you teach me how you done that? With the horse? I'd learn it right, I swear it. However long it takes. I can teach you," Ruth said. "It starts with giving him nothing to fight. And it starts before the crew's up, when the light's coming gray. That's the hour he'll let you learn. I'll be here, Toby said. Every morning, I'll be here. The town went home with a different story than the one it had ridden out to see, and Mrs. Pruitt at the counter told the new one now, as if she'd believed it all along, and nobody troubled to correct her. Because that, too, is how a small town turns. Eli waited until the yard was empty and the horse was back in the pen, dozing with a hind foot cocked and the sun going long over the hills. Ruth was hanging the braided halter on its nail by the barn when he came and stood near her, hat in his hand. For a man who'd said so much with a plain gait and never a word. He found plain speech enough when it mattered. Stay past the fall, he said. 4 words. No flowers, no speech, just a lean, weathered man turning his hat in his hands in the last of the light. Ruth looked at him, at the mended sleeve, at the gait he'd made swing quiet, at the one man in the territory who'd watched her break his only rule and chosen not to see. You know what I am, she said. The widow they wouldn't rent a bed to. I know what you are. He turned the hat. You're the woman who gentled a horse a whole county couldn't, and the woman who mended my coat and told me the post settled. He looked up. I'd like you to keep telling me the post settled for a good long while, Ruth, if you'll have a stubborn man and a hard place. I came off no train into no welcome, she said. I didn't think I'd find one out here either. Did you? I found a quiet gate, she said. A quiet gate's more than most folks ever give me. She hung the halter true on its nail. Yes, Eli, I'll stay. And she did. The Dawes place became known 3 counties over for horses gentled without a fight sound minded, soft-eyed. Worth double at sale, and men who'd laughed the length of a street in 1878 rode a full day to buy them, and never said the old word killer anywhere on the ground. The tally book filled and filled again, Cole's plain pencil hand in the front and Ruth's beside it, and in time other hands after. Vance never did take the halter that day, but he never broke another horse the old brutal method either, and out there that was as near an apology as such a man could make, and Ruth let it stand as one. 20 years on, the braided rope halter still hung on its nail, not by the barn now, but by the front door of the house Eli built her, worn pale and soft with use, and never once let go to rot. There was a girl on the place by then, come off the county road shunned for a thing that was not her fault, as Ruth had once come off it. Ruth had taken her in, and in the gray dark of a cold morning walked her out past the barn to a pen where a green colt stood waiting to be afraid of somebody. The girl held the old halter in both hands and looked at the colt, then at the woman with the graying dark hair and the fine weathered face. He's watching me, the girl whispered. What do I do first? Do I catch him? Do I show him I'm not scared? No, Ruth said. You do the one thing nobody ever did for him. The first rule my husband wrote, and the rule I've written under it every year since. She smiled and put her hand light on the girl's shoulder and gave her the answer she'd learned off a page in a dead man's hand a lifetime before, and proved true in front of a whole town along a fence. First, she said, you give him nothing to fight.